Oh, yes. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome in to Snow the Goalie, the only Flyers podcast, the People's podcast, the Players podcast, the Prognosticators podcast, the Pedialyte podcast, the Papers podcast, and by the way, the Presidential podcast, which we're going to get to here in a little bit. I believe this is episode 203 in the history of this illustrious show. And we've once again returned to being the Presidential podcast because we have two presidents on the show today. They're not here right now. We interviewed them right after the Flyers had what I would argue is the best press conference I've seen from your team, your town, your Philadelphia Flyers in quite some time. We're joined by not only Flyers president Keith Jones, but also the president of Comcast Spectacor, Valerie Camillo, who I don't think we ever thought was going to come on the show. Anthony has begged and pleaded with for the better part of, I think, 2 years to come on the show. Three good old Italian Americans just having a chat. So thank you to all of you who are tuning in live on the YouTube stream. If by some chance you've stumbled upon this show on Facebook, where I've shamelessly promoted it in every Philadelphia Flyers fan group, or if you're here via YouTube, welcome. If you're here on Twitter, welcome. We're going to get to those interviews in a little bit. Keith Jones and Valerie Camillo. Anthony, for those who are listening in the podcast feed, can you remind everyone where they can find this show early and live streaming? Do you happen to know off the top of your head? I have the banner ready. I'm going to test you.
Where they can find this is on YouTube.
Yeah. How do they find it? If they're in the podcast feed right now, listening, after the fact,
the Snow the Goalie YouTube page.
And what's the address to the Snow the Goalie YouTube page? Let me see if you've been paying attention to all this.
All you have to do is go on YouTube and search Snow the Goalie.
What's the other way to type it in? YouTube.com/Snow
the Goalie.
At Snow the Goalie. There it is, ladies and gentlemen, on the screen. There's the former educator.
I don't know, Russ. I'm still trying to figure out how the countdown clock counted down and then counted down a second time.
It's called
I was ready to talk. I was ready to talk, and then it started over. I was like,
it's called a loop.
There we go.
So this is where you can find the show. If you're watching on Facebook, by all means, you can stay there. You can comment there. If you're watching on YouTube, you're more than welcome to be there and to comment there as well. If you're watching us on Twitter on the Snow the Goalie feed at Snow the Goalie, that's totally fine. By the way, Eagles Pride 69 just subscribed. I'm not making that up. Eagles Pride 69 just subscribed while we put that up on the screen.
He's a John Runyon fan. That's all.
Or she. Well, let's not be or they.
Fair.
Let's not be exclusive here, Anthony. So it's on youtube.com/@SnowTheGoalie. We're on Facebook @SnowTheGoalie. We're on Instagram @SnowTheGoalie, TikTok @SnowTheGoalie, and Twitter @SnowTheGoalie. All right, I didn't do a great job of introducing this guy. The man who I've been doing the show with for 4 years now. God, it's way too long.
5.
Is it 5? 5 years. It is 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
5 years of doing this show together. Many press row shows, many episodes of this show. Anthony Sanfilippo, who you can find on Twitter @AntSanPhilly. How are you doing with your backwards Phillies cap, you hipster?
Yeah, no, I'm in my house freezing right now because the other people I live with like to have the air condition on absolute full blast, Arctic blast. And where my desk is located is on lower level. So, of course, it's always colder because the hot air rises. So it's always colder down here. So it's a beautiful, warm night outside, and I'm sitting here freezing, and I got to wear a hoodie, a sweatshirt, so that I'm not cold while we're talking about hockey in May.
Mm-hmm. Godspeed. Hey, I want to, before we get into some of these interviews, because we have to get into a few things here. So we've got Keith Jones on the show. We have Valerie Camillo on the show. We interviewed them after the press conference for those who are just joining the stream now. It was I would say it was a pretty exciting day. And I definitely want to dissect this with you. I think that we should kind of set the stage a little bit, literally and figuratively, of what it was like to be down there for the press conference. To give people an idea, typically they do these little press conferences. They do them at Skate Zone in the little media room. There are some questions, some comments, some concerns, and like that's it. And it feels like lip service, and we just go on with our day. But as part of this, like this new thing they're pushing, #new era of orange, they opened up the Wells Fargo Center after the Sixers blew Game 6. The next day, the floor is gone. The scoreboard is all the way down to the ground, used as the backdrop. And there you had Dan Hilferty in his first real public press conference.
Mm-hmm.
Valerie Camillo, Keith Jones, Danny Briere, and John Tortorella. Those 5 lined up across the stage. Each bring a unique skill set, each bring a varying level of experience in this league and in sports in general. It's one thing for me to say it because I've only done this for a few years. In your experience, like where does this rank in terms of just like, I don't want to call it a spectacle, right? It's not like they had fireworks. It's not like the Cirque du Soleil, but like just in terms of the setup and kind of making a statement. How did it land for you as the guy who's been covering the team for 2 decades?
It was pretty substantial. I'd say it was certainly a flashback, right? I mean, they made it a little bit bigger than a normal press conference to announce the hiring of the general manager. But it used to be, and they don't have it anymore because they remodeled the Wells Fargo Center. But they used to have it in what's some called the Hall of Fame room, and so the Hall of Fame room was it was a nice room on the club level of the Wells Fargo Center, and you could put 100 media in there, and it had like all the famous Flyers and Sixers who are they had like artist renderings and photographs and stuff on the walls. It was a cool little room, right? This was different in the regard that they actually did it on the floor of the Wells Fargo Center, and like you said, they brought the scoreboard down as the backdrop, but it did have that feeling of what the Flyers used to do, where it was always big and brassy and meant to get people excited about what they're doing. It's something that I haven't seen in a long time. Even towards the end of the Snyder era, like for example, when they hired Ron Hextall, they didn't have something with this kind of pomp and circumstance around it, right? I mean, this was bigger. This was bigger, and it was bigger for a reason, because part of what they are trying to do, and I don't want this to overshadow, the hiring of Keith Jones and Danny Briere dropping the interim tag and becoming the full-time GM. But part of what they are trying to do is reconnect with the city and become relevant in the city again. That is a goal and is a target for this organization under Dan Hilferty's leadership. That's part of what they have to do. Yes, there's a lot they have to do on the ice, and we're going to talk about all of that tonight. But from just the basic level, they have become so irrelevant in the past few years that they need to reconnect with the city. And so that's what this press conference was all about, was reconnecting with the city first and foremost, and then let's dive into the hockey, right? So I think that was why they did it. And I think it was a successful event that they were able to put on.
It's interesting in a sense because it's the first time that I've ever been called a shill for the team. Now, and I just want to give, I know that like some people are new to the show. Again, welcome. I have shit on this team relentlessly for years, mostly Chuck Fletcher for his incompetence and the way that he ran this team into the ground. But like, if there's somebody in the city of Philadelphia who like has gone down and like done the whole covering the team thing while also actively giving them a hard time for on ice product and off, I'm up there. I have to be somewhere up there. Now, I didn't go down. As we know, our dear friend Corn Pop on Twitter, who likes to call out that I haven't been to a game since November of 21. Other than that, like, been down there. I tend to go into the locker room, like, not afraid to write certain things and go in and, do the whole thing. I got called a shill because I tweeted out that I thought that was the best press conference I've seen the Flyers have in a long time. And that's because it was. In fact, there were multiple people, and I'm sure you talked to some people as well. There were multiple people who afterwards from the organization intimated that kind of a press conference could not have happened with some of the previous regime. That like it probably wouldn't have happened, and two, and it wouldn't have gone over like that. Like if you want to, if
well, think about it. Let me just stop you for 1 second.
Yeah, go ahead.
Think about it. I mean, they have just with the season ticket holders, they had an event. They had a season ticket holder event, and they trotted Chuck Fletcher out there a week before he was fired, and he was booed off the stage, basically, right? I mean, mercilessly booed off the. So I mean, that's your point is spot on and well taken. Even when they try to do it on a smaller scale, it was a disaster. So they could not have done something of this level and this magnitude with either Chuck or with Dave Scott, just because that's how disconnected those people were with the fan base and the city, that it doesn't matter. You could have put them up there and it wouldn't have mattered if they were, doing handstands and backflips and flying trapeze and stuff that would wow you, that you didn't think that they had it in them. It just didn't happen. It would never have happened. Fans would have still booed the hell out of them. As a matter of fact, they would have pulled the net out from underneath the high wire, right? I mean, like that's what that's how much the fans disliked the previous regime. That's why what they're doing now is important. It really is. It's really, really important. Because look, we could sit here and debate all we want whether Keith Jones and Danny Briere are going to be good at their job, not be good at their job. They're going to turn the Flyers around, not turn the Flyers around. It's going to be 5 more years of failure. It's going to be a quick recovery. Whatever argument you want to make, right?
Yeah.
None of that is as important as getting the city back on board with the organization.
Yeah.
I mean, ultimately it is, but you can't get there until you reconnect with your fans. You can't get to that point. Okay. You just can't, because they need to be in the building. They need to feel excited. They need to feel like there's something that they can connect to and get behind and support and generate that excitement. Because if you don't create that environment, even if you start making the team good again over the course of 3 to 5 years, you may not have enough fans left to care when you get to that point. So that's why it really is, when you're starting at the bottom, and you heard Tortorella say it back in December, they're not even at the studs, they're at the footer, right? With the rebuild, that's part of it. That's a big part of it. So yes, it has to be a connection to the city as part, and it's got to be a PR thing. It's got to be an optics thing. They got to play that game, and they got to make it work from that side. Otherwise, it really won't matter in the long run how successful or unsuccessful these guys are in their jobs.
I agree. Again, not a shill here. The thing that I've found the most impressive is the difference, and this is where you come back to, have you made a substantial change or a substantial improvement by what you had before versus what you have now? Dan Hilferty was extraordinarily impressive. Okay. Hilferty did a few things that Dave Scott never did. One, he said Ed Snyder's name. For some people, that means a lot. For others, it's an eye roll. But he did. And he mentioned the history of the team and how we need to get back to the history of the team. But there were multiple other things that Dan Hilferty said that connect on many levels. And it's something that you and I have talked about a million times about, Dave Scott should have just done the same thing. I'm not a hockey guy. I'm a hockey fan. And Hilferty talked about what it was like to try to get down to the 74 and 75 Stanley Cup parades, right? Like that. This is somebody who is a lifelong fan of the team. Bundy has pointed this out previously, that there was somebody, when Hilferty initially was brought on prior to being named CEO, that he had been coined by somebody who was in or around one of those suites as being the ultimate fanboy in a positive way, that this guy is as into the team as possible. But Hilferty even said multiple times, I'm not making hockey decisions. And yes, there are times that the 5 of us, meaning Dan Hilferty, Val Camillo, John Tortorella, Danny Briere, Keith Jones, are all going to be in the room together making decisions. But there are times that Dan Hilferty and Val Camillo aren't going to be there, that they're going to either leave or be asked to leave and let the 3 hockey minds do the hockey thing. And that's something that Dave Scott never said. That's something that he never intimated. And in fact, in a lot of ways, it just kind of speaks to the broken organizational structure that was here before and the failure to communicate. Here's the way that and I know we kind of broke this down with Bundy about the Keith Jones hiring last week. When you look at, here's Chuck Fletcher. He's handling 2 roles, president of hockey ops and GM. And then over here, you've got Danny Briere handling GM duties and Keith Jones handling this presidential role that we think is going to be different from what a traditional president role is. Which would you take if you're sitting out there right now? You had multiple years to see what Chuck Fletcher is as a GM in this league, and then here as the Flyers president and GM. If you line them up together, Chuck Fletcher in both roles or Danny Briere and Keith Jones with split roles, which one do you take? So actually, if you're on Facebook or if you're on Twitter or you're on YouTube, you can drop a comment. Like I do want to know, like which would you prefer?
Let me make a comparison.
When people are asking, is the Keith Jones hire a good hire? I say, would you rather have Chuck in both roles or would you rather have Danny Briere and Keith Jones? Go ahead.
No, I just want to make a comparison. And this is, I have a feeling I can make this comparison because, so many more people are paying attention to baseball in this town this year after the Phillies made that run to the World Series last year. But if you're watching and you're watching these games and the umpires are absolutely terrible this year, worse than they've ever been. And the reason that especially behind the plate, calling balls and strikes, and the reason that they are is because they have been tasked with now the new rules, keeping track of the timer, paying attention to that. They have so much more that they have to pay attention to that by the time that the pitch is being thrown, they're not necessarily as focused as they would have been prior to the new rules. And so therefore they're missing calls. They're calling strikes, balls, strikes. It's terrible. It's an epidemic across the league. That is exactly what you had with Chuck Fletcher being both president and general manager. He had too much responsibility and couldn't focus on either one. And therefore, it became a failure of both. By splitting the two parts back up, you're now allowing people to do a job and to do a more focused job. Again, we don't know. We have zero idea what that ultimately is going to be. Are they going to do well or not do well? Like, I believe that these guys know what they're doing. And I believe that they will start to do things in a much different way than we've ever seen with the Flyers before. This is not going to be your traditional Flyers setup where they're going to, go get big physical, tough guys and we're going to be competitive every year. It's not going to be that. Be prepared, Flyers fans. They are going to do it differently. You're going through a real rebuild. They're going to be younger next year than they were this year. They're probably going to be worse next year than they were this year. But the point is that they're going to do it through an idea of player development, getting younger, faster, more skilled. Yeah, are there going to be players on the roster that have a little bit of that grit and that, a little bit more physical play? Yes, because every team's got it. If you find a team that has none of that, and in the NHL, I don't think there is one, but even if someone finds one, they're not still playing. They're not competing for a Stanley Cup. Okay. But my point is there needs to be a little bit of that. But it doesn't need to overwhelm. Okay. 75% of your roster needs to be young, fast, skilled. The other 25% can be the other parts to kind of just fill in. That's how they're going to put this team together. And they're going to do it. They're going to do it through the draft. They're going to trade some contracts and pick up more assets, whether it's prospects or more draft picks. They're going to backfill for a little while, right? They're not going to go out and make big free agent splashes and hand out terrible contracts. Not going to happen. Not, at least not right up front, right? They're not going to go get those big name players from other teams until they're ready to try and win.
Because they're not stupid and they're also not delusional. This is why, not to relitigate it, this is why it's so difficult when you've had an extended period of being bad, like they had with Chuck Fletcher, where like you get to year 3 or year 4. If you're that executive, you don't want to lose your job. The idea of in year 3 or 4, trying to convince ownership, hey, we need to tear this down to the studs and like rebuild the thing the right way, you're going to get fired because the organization is going to look at you and say, well, what the hell have you done for 3 years? Like, why should we trust you to do it? In the case of Briere and Jones, and even Tortorella still has the most power. He still has the most influence. Dan Hilferty called him the spiritual leader of the team, right? So like Tortorella's got a lot of pull. But ultimately what you're looking at here is Keith Jones and Danny Briere likely having 3 to 4 years carte blanche. They're not, barring there being a scandal or some kind of crazy thing that's out of like their control or the organization's control, Briere and Jones probably have 3 to 4 years to tear this thing down to however low they need to and rebuild it. the thing that makes this different, and like a lot of fans asked for this, okay? There has been this request for a year and a half from people like me who are like, I think we're pretty sound-minded, and Bundy was like this as well, and you came on board with it as well, is listen, if you're going to tear it down, there was that letter that the Rangers sent to their fans a while back. Now, there's kind of been this relitigation of what that is and some revisionist history, but they effectively said, like, we're not going to be good, we're going to build. We need to do this thing the right way. That's what the new era of Orange, that's what this whole rebranding, this whole press conference, they didn't come out and say, oh, we think we can be a cup contender next year. Oh, we're going to be a playoff team next year. They said multiple times, this is going to take time. And to give people an idea, because this wasn't on camera after the presser, but like they did scrums. Dan Hilferty made himself available. When the hell has Dave Scott done that? Dan Hilferty made himself available. Val Camillo was available. John Tortorella was available. Danny Briere, Keith Jones, they were all available for media to go over and scrum around, just like after a game. Dan Hilferty is the one that I gravitated to because you never know how often you're going to get the CEO of the team. He had a lot of great insight, a lot of great stuff, but one of the things that he reiterated multiple times, so I believe at the time it was myself, Jordan Hall, Charlie O'Connor, I think Olivia from the Inquirer, and there was somebody else. I didn't recognize who it was. But there were like 5 of us around him. And he said time and time again, this is going to take time. We're going to build it the right way, but it is going to take us time. And that is, I think, as transparent as you can get as an organization that, like, look, you want to buy tickets to go to a C game next year? Don't expect to win, but expect them to play hard for Tortorella. Like, that's what that says to me.
Yeah.
And whether you agree with that or not as a fan, that they're at least being honest with you. At least there's finally somebody trying to tell the truth to the fan base, which is great. I don't know if there's anything else that you wanted to get into before we dive into the Jonesy clip.
Yeah, well, I mean, sure.
Or you want to go with Val first? We can go Val first.
No. Let's do Jonesy first, and I'll tell you why. Because I want to kind of get into something because off of what you just said. While you were with Dan Hilferty, I was talking to Danny Briere. And he was asked a question. I didn't ask this question, but he was asked a question. And the question was the team better than their record showed in 22-23? And Danny said, I would agree with that. Yes. So the follow-up question from that same person who was asking the question was Jack McCaffrey from Delaware County Times, just in case you want to know. He says, so if you get a couple players back from injury, et cetera, anything close to a playoff team next year? Because, and this is the trap question, right? I mean, you're asking, here's Danny's answer. I'm going to give it to you word for word. I would probably err on the side of caution and say no at this point. A lot will depend on what happens this summer. I've been having discussions with certain teams, and as teams get knocked out of the playoffs, I'll have more discussions leading up to the draft, but I'm not going to hide it. We're going to get even younger than we were last year. Ultimately, the players will decide how good we are, but it's going to depend on their development. He's telling you, when's the last time a general manager came out and said, I don't think we're going to be in the playoffs next year. No matter what I do this offseason, we're not going to be in the playoffs next year. If we are, it's a pleasant surprise. It's a surprise. That means our players have developed faster than we thought they would.
Set the bar low.
Right?
Set the bar low. Again, you're totally right. And it's a great point you made. Why set the bar unreasonably high, come up short, disappoint your fans? Right? Because Ant, like, think about it like this. He says that now. You report it. Right? He goes out of his way to mention we're probably not a playoff team. By the way, that's with Sean Couturier coming back, Cam Atkinson coming back, obviously not Ryan Ellis, but the rest. Joel Farabee being healthy for the season. All the works. Hopefully Wade Allison having a full healthy season. If Chuck Fletcher were here, he 1,000% would have said, I think we were better than our record and we're gonna be a competitive team next year, implying that they're a playoff team. There's the difference, right? Yeah. And so what Briere says by, setting that bar low is allowing himself to, and this is the brilliance of it. It allows, in the case of whoever the number 7 ends up being, or if there's a trade to be made, if there are multiple trades to be made, perhaps with some of the intel from Keith Jones, which we'll get to here in a second with the interview. But like, maybe you do make a few moves. Maybe there's a player that you didn't expect to be available that you're somehow able to go after. And then you go into next season and your team actually looks, somewhat decent. And you go, well, shit, Tortorella is good at raising the floor. Maybe it's a close to bubble team. Who looks like a genius? Danny Briere and Keith Jones and John Tortorella for building the roster and coaching it up. Because you can start with this low bar and exceed it. But doing the Fletcher style of over-promising and then sure as hell underperforming, this is a better way to go.
Yeah. And then one other thing I wanted to add, because this will lead into, because I also asked Keith this during the interview, which everybody will see in a moment. I then asked Danny, because look, this is not just about the players on the ice. There needs to be changes, organizational changes. If they want to do what Danny wants to do, they need to still make more changes within the front office. And by that, I don't necessarily mean the highest levels of the front office. Obviously, we have 2 new people in that place, but we need the people that they have working under them, whether it's assistant GMs, whether it's player development, whether it's scouting, whether it's analytics. There needs to be change there too. You can't just put lipstick on this pig and say, okay, Jonesy and Danny, they're great with the media. They're good public faces. They'll say the right things. They'll be open and transparent, and that'll be enough, and we'll make it better. No, it needs to be more. There still needs to be more purge. This is what I wrote last July, that everyone needs to go. They need a whole new change. So I asked Danny, I said to him, I said, you know, there's got to be something else that happens in the front office, right? I mean, this can't just be this. Here's his response. There will be some changes that will occur in the next few months. That's where having the chance to be on the inside the last 2+ years and dealing with every department on the hockey side, I was able to find out where our strong spots are, where our weak spots are, and what we need to improve on. You haven't seen too much yet because I wanted to get Keith's opinion on it. I didn't want to get too ahead of myself because I wanted to respect the process. But yeah, things are going to happen everywhere. That
sounds like somebody who's about to shake things up.
That's what you need to hear. What he's telling you, what I witnessed the last 2 years that I've been with this team has not been good enough, and it needs to change internally. We're not even talking about players. Internally.
Yep.
Danny wants to make changes. Jonesy wants them, and you'll hear Jonesy, because I ask him the same question. Jonesy admits it. They're going to make changes. So things are going to happen. That's why I'm telling people, and I know everybody's still like, oh, I don't believe in it. I don't know. It's the same old Flyers. It's not. It's different this time. And I'm not trying to be like...
It sounds like Stockholm Syndrome saying it, but in fairness...
But it is, right?
Well, I mean, in fairness, it feels different. When it's hard because I think as a fan, a lot of times, you go off of what's reported, you go off of what you see, you go off of what you hear on social media. And in our case, we were down there actually having these conversations with these people. And the difference is there are some people who are more forthcoming than others. And there are certainly some people who are like, keep everything close to the vest. That day, the way that I described a few people that we've, had run-ins with and positive and negative interactions with over the years, everybody looked like a 3,000 pounds weight had been lifted off their back. You saw people moving freely. You saw people moving without looking over their shoulder. You've got this feeling that there's actually a bit of unity with the team. And it goes back to something you reported or talked about on the show months ago, that like in the Chuck Fletcher regime, there were actively like moments where people were rooting against each other in that front office. That there were people within the team rooting against each other. They were rooting for each other to fail because there were 2 camps or more than 2 camps of thought, of like what the team should be doing. And was Chuck right? Was he wrong? All this, over collaboration, the works. And now it just feels better. And I want to get to this. I want you to tell me if this works. Okay. I'm going to try to pop a short video up. Tell me if you can hear it. And I guess let me know in the comments if you can hear it as well.
Keith Jones, the new president of hockey operations of the Flyers, and you're listening to Snow the Goalie.
Well, I hear it. Hopefully the fans do as well.
All right, let me know in the comments really quick if you're watching on YouTube if you can hear that. I hope the answer is yes, because if not, we are screwed. But I assume that if you can hear it, then they can hear it too.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, okay, good. Chris just said they can hear it. All right, good.
Thanks, Chris.
So what we're gonna do here?
Yeah, let's play the video. We'll do a quick reaction. And then before we get to Val, let's start running through some of the comments and start talking to people and see what answer some questions.
And there are a ton of comments, and I see all of you who put comments and everything on YouTube and Facebook, and I promise I want to get to as many of them as we can. So let's get to the Jonesy interview. We'll react to it on the other side, and we'll take a bunch of questions, comments, concerns, the works. So this is the interview that we did just after that giant press conference with the new president of hockey ops for the Philadelphia Flyers, Keith Jones. Remember, this is about 10 minutes, Anthony, 9 minutes. You can watch it if you're listening in the podcast feed. That's great. If you're watching on YouTube, if you're watching on Twitter, on Facebook, this will be about 9 minutes or so. And we'll come back. And like I said, we'll take questions, comments, concerns, and then we'll get to the Val Camillo one, which, by the way, and I know there are some people who like Val Camillo. There's some people who hate her. I have to say, I promise that'll be worth sticking around for in a little bit. So here's Jonesy. As of that moment, I don't know, Anthony, 40 minutes after having been publicly named president of hockey ops on the stage. Here's Keith Jones. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, I mean, we always say that Snow the Goalie is the only Flyers podcast, the People's Podcast, Players Podcast, Prognosticators Podcast, Pedialyte Podcast. We say presidential. And by God, today, it once again returns to being the presidential podcast because the man that you can see on screen now is the new president of your team, your town, your Philadelphia Flyers, Keith Jones. Jonesy, welcome to Snow the Goalie.
Thank you very much, guys. It's great to see you both. I notice Chris isn't here today. He's hiding on us.
He's hiding, yes.
But yeah, great to be here with you guys, and kind of a surreal day to say the least.
Let's talk about that a minute, Jonesy, because I'll be honest. I had heard a little bit ago that you were considering interviewing, but it was like, okay, I kind of felt like, that's just checking it out, kind of testing the waters. But then when it was like, oh, Jonesy's going to get the job, it's like that kind of surprised a lot of people.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I'm sure it surprised everybody, but you kind of kept it kind of hush hush. Yeah.
It's really a comparable to when I was drafted to the National Hockey League. I had a scout from the Washington Capitals come up to me, and when I was playing junior B hockey in Niagara Falls, he met me after a game. I was so shocked that this guy wanted to talk to me. I was 19 years old playing junior B. His name was Jack Button. He was a major factor in all Capitals draft picks back in the day. I was a season ticket holder going to Maple Leaf games, and I was a fan of hockey at 19. So when he told me I'm with the Washington Capitals, I'm a big fan, I was so shocked. I'm like, what? So I didn't tell anybody. I didn't let anybody know because I didn't want to, disappoint my friends or family. I just didn't want, and I didn't want the pressure of it. So I didn't tell anybody until that day I was drafted. And then when I got home, I was at Flamborough Downs, a local harness racing track. When I got back, the draft had taken place, and my dad was sitting on the porch, and he's like, "It's great." He goes, "You've been drafted." I saw the look on his face, and he goes, "You've been drafted." And I said, "Are we going to war?"
Oh my God!
True story. And he goes, "No, to the NHL." And I said, "What?" So it had happened, and I didn't even know the draft was taking place that day, to be honest with you. It was so shocking to people that my mother got a phone call from the draft. And the draft list at those days, it was 12 rounds. There was 3,000 kids on the list, and I wasn't one of the guys on the list. So they had to call from the draft table, the Capitals. "This is Washington Capitals. How old's your son?" And she said he's, his birthday is November the 8th, whatever. And they said, "Oh, good. Listen to this." And they held the phone up and announced the Washington Capitals with the 141st selection take Keith Jones from the Niagara Falls Junior B Canucks. So my mom got to listen to that. So they told her, "Tell him when he gets home, we want to talk to him at 8:00. So I sat down in my parents' basement, and I got a phone call from the Capitals. And a guy named Sam McMaster, who went on to be a GM in LA, came on the phone after other introductions. Brian Murray, I think, was the GM then, David Poyle around, and said, "Keith, I'm your godfather." He said, "You're going to make it to the National Hockey League." And I was 19. I was a guy with a belly. I was a guy with skinny arms. And I remember looking at kind of myself and going, this guy's losing his mind. So it was a lesson I learned, though, in a roundabout way, of keeping my mouth shut. And I didn't want, number one, I didn't want people in my profession to think, with being television, radio, all that stuff, to think I was one of those guys that's trying to get another job. and doing my job in order to make myself look smarter than people that are doing something that they've worked their whole life for.
Right.
I never wanted that to happen. That's why it was so important to me to keep it private. My sisters text me when the news started to break, and are you getting like a different job? That's how secretive it was.
That's great.
Yeah, my wife and daughter both knew. My best friends did not know, and that was hard because I was doing this intense interviewing process and traveling back and forth, and doing Zoom stuff and doing my job. And I never wanted it to diminish, what I was doing on the air, because the game is too important to me. So, and around, like, just, it's a long story, but that's really why it was kept as quiet as it was. And I think it benefited everyone that it kind of came out shockingly at the last minute.
It is crazy because, I mean, it's not just this city and it's not just this organization. It's not just, Comcast. There's so many leaks. And then given your national profile, the fact that Bundy throws it out there.
Yeah.
But like for no one to have an inkling, and I think it was maybe 24 hours before it ended up getting announced. Like it was mentioned that you were a finalist. Did you have any idea how many other people were in contention at that point?
I did not. And the best part was, for me, I didn't have to lie to anybody. Nobody asked me if I was interviewing. Nobody considered. I had a few people mention, you should do that job, like Joe Micheletti in New York. That would be a great job for you. Wes McCauley, the referee, but this was just little bypassing conversations. It's so under the radar. But that I think is probably what was the most shocking thing. But I didn't have to lie. If one of my best friends came up to me and said, "Hey, are you involved in that?" I would have told him the honest answer. But luckily, that did not happen.
Yeah.
And I forgive you guys for not believing in it. But that's kind of the way it went, and here I am.
I was talking to Bundy about this yesterday. One of the things that I think not a lot of people recognize or realize, I should say, is as broadcasters, you get more information than maybe anybody else about what's going on with everybody, players, coaches, systems, the team, just like the feeling. And like you hear so much, and especially being a national guy, you get it even more because you get it from every team, not just the one team that you're covering. Can you just talk about that being kind of where a lot of what makes you a person that makes sense for this role kind of comes into play?
Yeah, I've always been trusted, and because when people give me information that's between us, it really is.
Yeah.
And I think that's really been important. I think it's really important in doing the job that I'm going to start doing now. I want to build honest relationships with people and other teams, and I want trades to be good for both teams, whatever the situation is. I think those qualities help. So coaches have been very forthright with me. Often in interviews, they'll look directly at me when I'm talking to them, and it's really, I know that they feel comfortable that it's going to stay between us. I think that matters, and I do think. And I wasn't doing it to gather information. I just wanted to do the best possible broadcast I could do with that stuff that they wanted out there, and help them in the job and the messaging they're trying to get across.
So my last question, because I know you're on a tight schedule. When we look at your relationships with these coaches and the fact that they've been so forthright, everybody's saying that it's going to take time to turn this thing around. But is there like a little bit of intel, some insight there that like, all right, there might be a couple of change of scenery candidates who might not be on the radar of every other GM and president of hockey ops in the league, where you look at Danny now and say like, here are three guys that I think could be gettable, whether or not they were on your radar or not. Like, I would think that might be.
Yeah, no, it's all the type of information that we're going to need. We want all the information that we can get in order to make the right decisions. And you really have to pay attention. You have to listen. You got to have people that work for you that listen. And you also need people that work for you that don't give out information. We want to make sure that we keep it in our tight circle. We want to include our fans. We want our fans to know as much as we can possibly tell them. The number one thing we're telling them is we're going to rebuild. This is not going to happen overnight. But I thought Danny had a really good message saying the players will decide how quickly this happens. And we had some positive things happen last year. I would not have been overly excited taking over this team going back 2 years ago. that was a team that was down 3-0 and the score ended up 7-1. Last year, they got down 3-0. They battled to the end and often would tie and then maybe lose late in the game. There's positive signs that are taking place, and a lot of it has to do with the head coach, but the players did a good job this year too, and we've got some that we can really use moving forward to make this place a really good place to be again.
I'll make this the last question, and I asked this to Danny just now, and I got a really good answer from him, but I want to get your perspective on it as well. Obviously, everybody wants to talk about the team, the players, and what it's going to look like going forward. Obviously, there's a lot of work to be done there. But part of your job is to run the whole operation. So do you envision that there might be still things that have to be done off ice as far as your staff and within management to kind of get things going in the right direction?
Yeah, we're going to use our resources. We have a resourceful organization. We have the ability to hire the right people. There would be, some intense interviewing going on for positions that may or may not be available. And I want to do a real listening tour of everyone that's involved. These are not decisions that would be made overnight, but we want to put together the best team that we possibly can, the best, whether it's, some analytical genius that's out there but we want to be advanced in our thinking and want to use every possible asset that we can, gain an advantage with. So we're available and we're looking.
Awesome.
Fantastic.
And Jonesy, thank you for your time.
Yeah, awesome.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is your new president of hockey ops, Keith Jones. So we got some questions, comments, and concerns going during that interview, which obviously we did not just do now. We did that a few days ago. It's interesting because there were a lot of concerns, and I'm interested now to know from people. So again, YouTube, Facebook, you can comment below. I'm interested to know, after listening to that, if it's changed your perspective on the Keith Jones hire. There's one thing in there that I definitely want to highlight. I'm sure there's something in there that you want to highlight as well. John Irizarry says, so Jonesy always has to start off with a story. Love it. Frystar Zero says, just listening to this man talks gives me so much confidence. Same with Danny. There's no way these two let the franchise burn to the ground.
I think that's a very astute comment.
Yeah,
I think it really is a very astute comment, because they will not pack it in. They will not mail it in. They will not be like, oh, well, we screwed up. All right, let somebody else do it. They are going to be stewards for the franchise as much as they are going to be to, rebuild it and try and be a winner again. The fact that they care so much about the team, the organization, they won't let it go. They won't let it get to where it got to.
Mike Miller says he sounds just like his book. Great fit. Chris Burns on YouTube. Jones is awesome. CMZ catching on the Wes McCauley thing. Always trying to stick his nose in. Rob South says that Wes McCauley is the best ref in the game currently. Kenny Powers Mullet with a very good point question. And maybe Jonesy said that he'll come back on the show.
I might be able to answer this.
I don't know. Do you want to though, or is that something that's better for Jonesy?
It's a speculation. It's not a.
Okay, so let me read this off for the podcast listeners first. Jonesy has said the opportunity came out of nowhere. Someone approached him and asked if he'd be interested, but he's never revealed who approached him about the job nor who recommended him.
Yeah, I don't. He's not told me, so I want to put that out there first. So what I'm about to say is not coming from Keith Jones. It's not coming from anybody who said, "Hey, Anthony, here's who's asked Keith Jones." I'm just putting some puzzle pieces together and knowing a little bit about their process and what took place. I'm going to say the person who reached out to him was Billy King.
You think so?
I do.
Wow.
I do.
The WIP connection.
The WIP connection.
The morning show connection.
It was probably just one of those things where he's like, hey, let's just spitballing. Is this something that you would potentially be interested in? Let's just from a high level conversation, not necessarily saying that he was the number one target for the job, but more so like, hey, I'm just trying to put a list together. Would this be something you would be interested in? I just get a sense. I get a sense that that's who it is.
Lee Carasso on Facebook says, great interview. Very psyched with Jonesy. Frystar Zero at the end there says, bravo, Jonesy. Mm-hmm. Rob South, is Jonesy pretty much saying it's an open checkbook when it comes to getting the right personnel in the organization? That I think has been a resounding yes. And in fairness, That was also in place when Chuck was here. Chuck overhauled, and we say overhauled, the analytics department on the team, expanded it to be one of the larger ones in the league. It didn't amount to anything, but it was still Comcast has given the financial resources to go out and fix the front office in the past. It's just that maybe the hires haven't been good or the person who was in charge of them weren't as good. But that there has never been, at least intimated to me, I'm assuming to you, that Comcast has held off on spending resources on the front office. Fair? And the organization,
Look,
like on that side, scouting and everything.
Comcast, for all of its negatives, and
there are
many, and I am not a Comcast guy, right? I'm a Verizon. I have Verizon in my house. Just so people know, that's my internet provider is Verizon, not Comcast.
Stick it to the man.
I don't like them a little bit. For that, with all that said, they're going to spend the money. If the Flyers go to Comcast and say we need X amount of dollars for this upgrade to be competitive, they're not even going to question it. I mean, it's going to be like, yeah, whatever you need. And they've always been that way. There's never been a time when Comcast has basically said, we don't want to spend the money. So just keep that. The one good thing about Comcast is they got bottomless pockets, and they don't really push back against those things.
Scott Perloff on YouTube says, in Jones and Danny we trust. Sean C. taking a shot at my mustache. This is my wife's fault. I don't like only having a mustache.
I called him Nacho Libre before we turned
Nacho! Sometimes when you are a man, you wear stretchy pants in your room. It is for fun. Yeah. Anyway, says that it's as tragic as Jeff Gordon's from the early 1990s, if you know, you know. Who is Mike Mal? Says, feels good to have a little trust in this team again. It's been a long time. Jim Bradley on Facebook. I'm happy to have Keith Jones. And I think it's supposed to be in Briere.
Yeah.
CMZ. We have 3 great hockey minds ready to turn this Hextall Fletcher-induced mess around. Pumped. Eddie Revox, longtime listener and viewer of this and the Press Row Show. If you drown out the fan noise and skepticism and listen to the voices of those who have been in and around the sport for a long time, they're all excited, and we should be too. TTP Sports says they just give off a sense that they care, which is a breath of fresh air. Chuck sounded like he was done with everything. Agreed.
Yeah.
Olczyk definitely recommended when interviewed, says JC's. The Olczyk thing is interesting. And as we talked about on last week's episode, there was a belief that Olczyk was the favorite, and then something, may have changed.
I will say this from people that I've talked to about the search, and why I'm going to go against what was just suggested, that Eddie Olczyk was the person recommending. Eddie Olczyk wanted this job. Mm-hmm. Eddie Olczyk thought he was getting this job. He was confident he was getting this job. That's not to say the Flyers told him that. I think that he felt like it was a really great interview, a really great second interview. And I really think that he got the feeling from how things were going that it was going to be his. I doubt that someone who wanted the job as much as he did would recommend somebody else for that same job. So again, that's just some things that I know about the process there. So
interesting. Yeah. Lucy asks, I'd like to know what Jonesy believes is the number one issue he needs to fix, regardless of what he was told by management. His outside perspective is important.
I think we'll eventually start to find this stuff out, right? I mean, look, the guy's been on the job for 4 days, okay? And he's going to dive in pretty quick. All right, I'll say this. Here's what I can say. I've spoken to both Danny Briere and Keith Jones, not for publication, not for anything, just conversational stuff. They're in unison with what needs to happen. Okay. And I didn't talk to them together. So it's not like, oh, he said this and he said, no, they each said it separately. Okay. So they're in unison with what needs to happen. And I think that if you're going to look at what they're going to do, they're going to try and shed salary, blow out a couple veterans, and give young players an opportunity. Yeah. That's all they can do. They're not going to. There's if anybody who has this idea in their head that they're going to go out and trade for legit NHL talent, all-star caliber, it's not happening. It's just get it out of your head from now. It's really not going to happen. Might they trade for a prospect type player? Might they get a player who was a prospect and now isn't anymore, or had a bad situation, needs a new start somewhere? Maybe. I think you could maybe see something like that take place. But their plan is to go through is to draft the talent and develop the talent from within, backfill, right, with some veterans that can fill a void short term without long term contracts, so they're not tied down to bad money. Okay, and then once the youth develops to where they want it to be, then they'll consider the big moves. So don't expect the big moves are going to be the ones going out. Okay, yeah. The big. So if you say, "What is Danny going to make a big move?" The big moves are going to be trading Kevin Hayes, trading Ivan Provorov, and anything like that. I mean, decisions like that. Those are going to be your big moves. They're not going to be a big move coming in.
This is a good question for Rob South. Do you think they may have to give up assets to offload players like a ghost trade? I'm going to be honest. I don't see Danny as being a guy held over a barrel and having to attach a valuable draft pick just to get off of a contract, because they know that this is going to be a long thing. There's nothing to preclude them from just having a guy sit or have a significantly reduced role. I mean, it's not ideal for the player, but they're not going to give up valuable draft capital down the line just to get off of the final year of a deal.
No, I think what's going to happen, and let's take an example like Kevin Hayes, right?
Yeah.
They're going to have to eat some of that salary. So that's what's going to prevent them from having to give up the draft picks. Right? When they traded Ghost, they were trading Ghost and not keeping any salary because they wanted to replace him and still be competitive. So they sacrificed draft picks to have somebody else take the full salary. With Kevin Hayes, they're going to eat some of it. Now, what I was told a couple months ago, that it was going to be about a third of that contract. Do I think it could be a little bit less? Do I think it might get it down to 20, 25%? Maybe. I think that's possible. But I do think that's the case. I really do. I think that you'll get something for Keith Jones. It won't be anything great. I don't think you're getting anything great, but you're not going to have to give up assets to trade that salary. That definitely is not going to happen.
CMZ asks about Hayes, Provy, and Konechny for assets. I guess the interesting thing, Ant, I think Provorov is going to get them something.
Yeah, he will,
and should get them a pretty decent something. I don't know what that something is, but
if I had to guess, because somebody who's going to trade for Provorov is going to be a contender. Right. Mm-hmm. So they're looking for that kind of player to bolster their blue line. I do think you can probably get a late first round pick for Provorov. It may not be this year. It may be 24. But that's okay. It's okay if you have 3 first rounders next year. I mean, you're going to complain about that, right?
It's the flexibility again of having that starting over with your GM and your president of hockey ops. You're allowed to punt for a year on that pick because you don't have to worry about your job security.
Yeah, well, I mean, of course. But my point is that I think that his value is still enough to get a first rounder. Yeah. Could I see it potentially sliding down into a second round pick and a prospect? Maybe, but I do think you can still get a late first rounder for Provorov.
What would you rather do? And people in the comments can offer this as well. Would you rather shoot for the late first round pick, and that's really the only asset of value, or take a conditional that might end up conveying as a second, but get a change of scenery prospect? Well, the one that comes to mind is Owen Tippett, right? And Tippett looks like he's going to be an actual contributor on this team. I think that's just first or conditional.
No, I think
first
that
and a prospect.
I think both are fine. I think that you would prefer. I mean, if you have a situation that it turns out to be like the Giroux trade, where you get a first round pick and a player who has blossomed a little bit, right? Yeah. Then of course, that's the better return. It'll be interesting. It depends. I guess it depends on how many people how many teams are really involved in chasing after him, because then you can drive the price up, right? I mean,
Yep.
so I think that's a lot of that has to be kind of determined yet. And when Danny says as teams drop out, then so that tells you that there's teams still in, or there, as of Friday, there were still teams still in, who are probably interested in a player like Provorov, and he had to wait till they were done before he could talk to them further.
You know who stands out? You think after getting bounced in 5 games, you think Toronto maybe could be interested in
Want to pop up Adam Cooper's comment there?
Yeah. Hold on. Let me scroll back down there. There it is. Oops. I just shuffled. There we go. Adam Cooper. Leafs have a late first. Possibly they make a move for Provi.
Could be.
It could be an interesting one. Hey, there are a lot of questions and comments and everything in the YouTube and the Facebook thread over here. And as we just did, we got to a lot of them. We're going to get to a lot more. But before we do, we had one other interview. And as we said, it's the presidential podcast. This was a shorter interview. This actually happened before the Keith Jones interview. And it's something that I never thought was going to happen on this show. I still am kind of...
You and me both, just so you know.
I'm still... I don't think I would say I'm shaken by it. Right? Like, I don't think that I would go out of my way to say that, like, I'm not sure that it did happen, but it did. I'm gonna throw this on the screen really quick. Never did I ever think that this would have happened.
This is Valerie Camillo with the Philadelphia Flyers, and you're listening to Snow the Goalie.
I'm still at a loss. I was called a shill on Twitter. This might officially get me called a shill. So we had Valerie Camillo on. Anthony, if we go back a few years, we need to be transparent.
You don't need to even go back a few years.
No,
you
no,
go
but-
back
but-
to
no, 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 but hold on,
January of
hold on.
last year.
We have to go back a little bit farther. Darth Flyer, Hell Freezes Over podcast. Okay. Years ago, when we were doing the Press Row show, I distinctly remember an episode of the Press Row show where people were upset. The upper level was mostly empty. And we threw out 2 names. And we said, if you're upset with what's going on the business side, Valerie Camillo and Mike Shane.
And we gave their Twitter handles out, I believe.
We did. And I don't think
Yes.
either of them still have a Twitter. Saw Mike Shane. By the way, saw Mike Shane at the press conference. He looked like he had a weight off his shoulders. And then, of course, we saw Valerie Camillo. A weight off of her shoulders. I want to get to this interview because I think it might change some minds. I'm at least 40% sure that there are some people who are going to go into this not liking Val Camillo, who are going to come out of it and maybe not love Valerie Camillo, but aren't going to actively hate her, which, by the way, is still a solid job. So here we go. I'm gonna throw this. I'm gonna throw this up here, Ant. And then when we come back, we're gonna take the rest of the questions and comments in the YouTube and the Facebook feed. And I promise you're gonna want to stick around for this interview because it's good. All right, here we go. Welcome into Snow the Goalie, the Only Flyers podcast, the People's Podcast, Players Podcast, Prognosticators Podcast, Pedialyte Podcast, Papers Podcast, and now we welcome to the show somebody who, I have to be honest, if you had told me a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, would be on the show, I probably wouldn't have believed you. But here we are,
Nor would I.
three
That's okay.
three Italian Americans, I believe.
Yes,
on
that's
the
correct.
show.
Yes.
Maybe we have to do a spinoff pod. And that, of course, is Valerie Camillo. Thanks so much for coming on to Snow the Goalie on a big day. Big day.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I mean, like, just talk about like what your feelings are right now. I mean, to have an event like this today, where you're announcing Keith Jones, you're announcing Danny Briere, and really kind of the feel of everything being together again here with the Philadelphia Flyer.
I think everyone just feels reinvigorated and excited and hopeful and together, right? Like one team together, excited for the future. And I think that's exactly what this organization, the city, and this fan base needs.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like there's just a feeling, like you can get it. Like when you walked into the building, it was almost palpable, right? Of just kind of the excitement that you guys have. And so when you have that kind of translates for everyone else, doesn't it?
And that's hard to do because, you know, there's business, there's hockey, there's alumni, there's a ton of different stakeholders who have feelings about, you know, these two searches. And yet it seems like everybody's pretty happy. Fans, community, it's a great day for us. We're super excited.
I'm going to ask you basically the same question that I asked during the press conference, but I think it's important for the people who are listening on the pod here to really kind of get it. There's a lot of talk about collaboration. That's kind of a buzzword for you guys, between the five of you now. Can you talk about, for you specifically from a business perspective, how important that is and what that's going to mean going forward to be able to have a really good collaboration with the hockey ops?
A+ organizations in sports, and I've worked across different leagues. I've worked at the NBA, I've worked at Major League Baseball, and now I've worked at the NHL. A+ organizations are one team, full stop. Business, hockey, every facet of the organization is connected and working together to win a Stanley Cup, to deliver a great fan experience at the arena, and to serve the community and make a difference in the community. And so to be together like this, I think the fans are going to step back and say, this organization feels different. This organization, quite frankly, seems to have their shit together, and that's what we need.
So the new phrase is a new era of orange.
Yeah.
So I'm going to assume you came up with that.
Well, our marketing team came up with it, but again, it's collaborative. Like, we had input from hockey operations. We're not, running off and doing things on an island. We want their opinion, and they loved it.
So I took essentially a year away from coming down and harassing people down here.
Made my life easier.
And maybe it's just being away from it for a year, but it genuinely does feel entirely different. The energy in the building today feels like an entirely different thing than I had been accustomed to.
Well, and you noticed it to the carnival, right? For the first time, the carnival we noticed it.
Where I broke your toe,
Yes.
allegedly.
Allegedly. When you look at it, like, it feels like it's more than just a catchphrase. It feels like it really is a new era. So as somebody who's been here through the past era and now this one, do you also feel that same kind of, reinvigorated energy?
100%. And I've been talking to, our employees, whether they're the game day employees that support our events or our front office employees on the business side, on the hockey side, and everyone feels it. And that's important because it means it's authentic. It's not something we're just talking about, or it's a marketing slogan or what have you. So yeah, I mean, it's an exciting day to be part of the Philadelphia Flyers organization, and we cannot wait for next season.
One of the answer you gave me out in the press conference, I don't want you to give me any details. I know you can't give any specifics, but you had mentioned talking about the team getting involved in maybe some more marquee games. Obviously that's a key thing. Like, everybody, obviously you always want to do something like that, but you said games plural. Is this something that's like not just going to be like a one-off down the road? You're really going to push to try and get the Flyers back involved in these things again, like they used to be a decade ago? Yeah,
there's actually two that we're interested in. One near term, one a little bit further out. That's probably all I can say without getting in trouble with the league. But again, like, my first call was because I had a meeting with the NHL, and my first call after that meeting was to Keith to let him know, hey, this is the update. Like, what do you think? And he was super excited because he understands that this journey back, it needs to involve the fans. It needs to have these moments that they're excited about too. And so we're talking about some really big ideas with the league, and hopefully some of them will come to fruition.
How about for some stuff here in this building? Anything for here?
Yeah, I mean, well, some of the things we're talking about might have, be right here in the sports complex, but we're relooking at everything, and with the fan first in mind, and knowing that hockey operations is willing, and interested in participating, I think it's going to make the fan experience better, because they don't want to, quite frankly, they don't want to just talk to me and the folks on the business side. That's the connectivity they want, and in more than a cursory way. And I think that's what we're going to get with Keith and Danny. And I've known Danny for 5 years, and all I can say is that he is the real deal. What you see is what you get. He's a genuinely good guy. He's smart as hell. He's hardworking. He's humble. And the fans already love him, so I don't need to sell him in, but he's going to be awesome in this job. That's my thought.
Russ, I'm going to let you take the last one because I know Val's got to get moving along to another event.
I like to look at these things as more of like a human story, I guess, right? So like you have this big title, and you've been in charge of overseeing, and I'll be the one to say it, like a team that hasn't been good, right? And that isn't you. You don't build the hockey team. But does it give you, I guess, another level of excitement to know that now that there's this regime change, and now that all these three minds are in lockstep, and it sounds like Keith Jones will be, in constant communication with you, does it kind of make your job more enjoyable and more exciting than it even was in, like, say, like the last 2 years or so?
I think it makes everything easier for the folks on the business side. And again, it's not about me. There's over 300 people that work on the business side on the team. And, I was just reading the other night about the Chicago Blackhawks, and they won the draft lottery. And I think the hour after winning it, they sold tens of thousands of tickets. Like, we haven't had a moment like that, be it a lucky moment like that or a big roster moment or some success on the ice in a number of years. And yet we have a team of really talented people that work every day to try to fill this arena for Flyers games. And I am so proud of them on this journey over the last few years. I think they've done a phenomenal job. Mike Shane, Lisa Fagenbaum lead that team. And people don't recognize how much it's so much easier when you got the big break and the winning team. It's so much harder when you've been through the last few years that we've been through. And so I do want to just take a moment to recognize that team. I think they did an unbelievable job, this season, obviously.
Especially this season.
Challenging.
Yeah.
And yet you came and our fans were there and they were into it. And so congratulations to them. And that's who I think of when I answer that question, is I think about what it means to them, because it'll help them, it'll help everyone. Marketing the social media team, which every post gets, if people aren't feeling good, every comment is negative. And these guys and gals are doing a great job. And I'm glad they have some stuff to work with, and we look forward over the next few years and journeys. But again, we're not going to win immediately. I think you've heard that consistently today. So there's going to be patience. The difference is going to be that Keith and Danny are going to articulate a vision for our fans and bring them along on the journey. It's not going to be like, what's going on over there at the Flyers? They're going to be clear when it's working, when it's not working, and hopefully it's going to be working more than not.
Val,
fantastic.
Thank you for your time. Greatly appreciate it. You've made it on to Snow the Goalie.
I know.
It's unbelievable.
You
survived Snow the
I
Goalie.
only had to break your toe to get on.
Just to get on the show.
That's
not so bad.
That was part of the deal.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you guys
for your time.
All right,
Really
and I'll
appreciate
come
it.
back again. I
Awesome.
promise.
That's
I
actually
promise.
Well, as Darth Flyer said before, the Hell Freezes Over podcast, Valerie Camillo on the show. How about that? I want to know from people in the comments what you thought. Just let us know.
I know
people with some very astute ideas here. So she mentioned that a few things that she's been in communication with the league about abroad and here. You asked about in this building, as in Wells Fargo Center, and she also she did mention, or in the sports complex, which I think makes anybody's eyes go, because you go, all right, well, that can mean one of a few things. Don't forget they did the Stadium Series game against the Penguins. What was it? 4 years ago.
When did they trade Wayne Simmons? That was his last game.
Well, was it February of 2020? It was just before COVID. I think it was 2020.
It wasn't 20. It was the year before.
It was 19.
That.
So it was 19.
Yeah.
I mean that technically would qualify. They've had a Winter Classic in the past. I mean that would be interesting.
So I know people
could be an All-Star game.
People keep asking.
Throws that out.
Yeah, people keep asking, and I think the reason that I asked the follow-up question about this building when I said that is I was trying to gauge what she was talking about. And when she said the sports complex, that made me think immediately it's outdoors and not indoors. So, I mean, is it possible that they get the All-Star game? Is it possible that they get the draft to come here again? I mean, I think, those things are maybe down the road. Is it possible that they play in Europe down the road? Cool. I mean, I think really those things are all going to be discussed and all going to be on the table. But I think that I think when she said the sports complex, I think that should have been the indicator for everybody that they're pushing to get an outdoor game. And since the last one was just a regular outdoor series game, I wouldn't be surprised if the next one was an attempt to get the Winter Classic at some point.
It'd be interesting for sure. Hey, there are some comments here, and I asked, what people's thoughts were about that. So let's go here. Brandon Summerman, whole situation is so good for Valerie. No one took more heat for no reason than her. Well, we'd have to talk about that, during the last few years, started the reactivation with fans and has done a tremendous job doing so. You know, we've noticed on the noted on the show, and somebody called you on Twitter on it today about her being, I think it was in the beginning when she first got here, she wanted to trailblaze and wasn't maybe as focused on learning the market as she probably should have been. And it seems like in the last year and a half, there's been a big shift in that mentality.
And she spearheaded it.
Yeah.
Let's be fair. I mean, this comes from the top when that change happened, and it really hit the fan for them when and I don't want to make it like it was our responsibility, but it was a reaction from something that we put out there. But we put out on social media, on Twitter, that we were surprised that they didn't mention Ed Snyder on his birthday. There was a home game that day, right? It was January of 22. There was a home game on his birthday, and that they just were going to let the game go by without a mention in the building, like just, like maybe something like during a timeout, just like, on this day, we remember our founder, something simple. And that's all we said. Like, we weren't like killing them for it. We just put it out there. Like, this was a misstep. This was just another misstep.
Yeah.
It blew up because the Snyder family started reacting. Ed's daughter started reacting on Twitter, and it made a big to-do, and it went cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, right? I mean, that's exactly what happened. And I think that was the moment that they realized, okay, we may have lost touch with our people. We need to find out how to get back. And Val was spearheaded this. She reconnected with Snyder Hockey because there had been a kind of a falling out between Snyder Hockey and the team. She reconnected with the Snyder family. Had invited them down to games, started talking to them, getting to know them, having them become part of, reacquainted with the organization and become, part of the organization. And then doing a lot of the outreach to the fan base and to the city again, and really kind of and being the person in front. One thing, I said this on the podcast before when it happened, and at the time, I like, this was at the right near the beginning, and I was like, where is she going with this? But I then saw it after a while, and I kind of said, you know what, that's good. They've hired so many people who are not from Philadelphia, who don't have that institutional knowledge of the organization, and they're asking them to be in positions to run this franchise, not recognizing previously just how important it is to have that institutional knowledge in this city, which is different than any other city. Boston might be the only other one, in New York maybe a little bit, but other than that, there's no other city in America like Philadelphia when it comes to their sports. So I think what ends up happening there is she ended up having, during like a lunch hour or just after lunch, in making the entire staff go sit in the bowl of the Wells Fargo Center. And we're watching old documentaries about the Flyers, about their history. She made them watch the HBO special. They watched some of the 80s VH. You weren't even alive, Russ, but they used to put out VHS tapes, like season replays, in the mid 80s, though. I mean, but they used to put them out, and those were she made the staff watch these for no other reason but to kind of understand what it was about, because there was a lot of stuff about the connection between the fans and the team and what the team meant. And at the time, it was kind of like, I wasn't sure where she was going, but now you see it, right? Now you see it, because now they are re-embracing that. And it's one thing I want to point out, that what Dan Hilferty said that I thought was really kind of important is that, and this isn't his exact words, this is my wording of it, but it's I'm paraphrasing. They need to bring back the mystique of the past, like what it was to be a Flyer, what it was to be connected to this city, what it was like for the opposing team to come into the city and not want to play it. They call it the Philly flu, right? Like, they want all that to kind of be part of the organization still, but, and this is the important but, do it in the modern game.
Yeah.
Not do it with the same style of player that you had to do it then, which was what the whole thing is saying, well, that's the old Flyer way. Here we go again. They're doing the same thing. No, they want to bring that feeling back, but do it within the modern game. This is why their marketing slogan really makes sense. It's actually kind of a smart marketing slogan.
A new era
in the
of
sense
Orange.
that a new era of Orange. So it's the same thing as before as far as the mystique, but doing it in this generation and in this style of game, that in order how you have to do it. So I think those are the things that you're going to see happen from a business side, and that's why I'm glad Val was able to come on and kind of talk about it a little bit.
So we asked what people thought. Who is Mike Val says you can see why she's gotten to the place she has. She's good at this. Lucy says she seems nice, certainly comfortable being in front of the camera, would definitely have her back. Matt Mullen, you guys turned heel having her on. I'm not against it though. See, there you go. There's one of the changes, right? There's one of the Rob South. I know nothing about her, but she seems to be on the same level as Danny and Jones, smart and humble. Colin Craddock over on Facebook. The recent transparency is really refreshing. Seems like the last 5 years we've been screaming for someone from the organization to talk to the fans. We finally seem to have that. And bookmark that one in your head, because I want to come back to something that Hilferty said. It was a question I asked at the press conference, and I followed up with him after. We had people saying about, it would be really cool to get an outdoor game in 2026. You got the 200th birthday. Where's the other one at? Hold on a second. It was
while you're looking.
Here we go. Linda Joseph. It's a good thing that she gets it when it comes to the business side and the fans. Took a little longer than it should, but nice to see. Big part of that was, Chuck, not a great communicator.
Well, and so what I will say to that, I mean, because I know there's a lot of people who are still, not happy with the way things went down when Val first got here. A lot of people who worked for the team, fans, who feel like that they were spurned, season ticket holders especially. They really felt like they were the ones who were screwed over. And I get it. And look, it's not easy sometimes to get past that. But I will say this: when you see that there is a change, and maybe it happened later than it needed to, but don't you sit there and say, at least the change is happening and at least the good is now happening? Like, I mean, yes, maybe they shouldn't have gone through what they went through to get to this point.
Yeah.
But the fact is that they finally had the light bulb went on for us a lot sooner than it did for them. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But the light bulb did go on for them.
Yeah.
And that's a good, otherwise you're going to sit here and you would be wallowing in the fact that it's, misery again next year and the year after and the year, like it would be no better. At least the fact is that they figured it out and got it right. Took them longer to. It's like applauding the people at a marathon who were coming in, an hour after the winners, right? They deserve the credit. They got it.
Yeah.
I couldn't do it. I couldn't do the job. I couldn't do that. What they did, but they did it. They accomplished it.
Yeah.
So you give them credit.
Eddie Revox, no doubt they have their shit together comment was the one Russ was referring to when he said many would come away liking Val. I actually thought that they were going to request that to be struck from the record. They did not. So now it lives. It lives on the internet.
If you go back and watch it later and you see, as soon as she says it, you see me turn to my left. And although Russ was sitting to my left, and you can just assume that I was looking at Russ, believe me when I tell you I was not. I was looking over to the PR folks and making sure that they were cool with that. And they were excited. They were sitting there pumping the fist, like, yeah, that way to go, Val. So I was like, oh, great, we're gonna use it.
It was interesting. It was interesting for sure. There's I think a big takeaway that I hope people have from this one today, from this episode, from these interviews, from the works. It's been really hard to be positive about this team. And you and I have talked a million times over the last 5 years about, boy, oh boy, wouldn't it be nice to have a good team to cover? Wouldn't it be nice to be able to start up the show and to actually be genuinely excited about what's going on the ice? And there are obviously the people out there who are of the belief that, sports writers or sports media personalities or whatever shouldn't be fans. They should be objective, yada, yada. You can be both, to an extent. There is nothing wrong with when you're covering a team, hoping the team does well, because it makes your job a more enjoyable experience. It's a slog. I mean, I will never, ever complain about having the opportunity to go down and cover some games. And I do think that there are people in this city, I'm not saying Flyers exclusive, this is just media in general. There are some people who are paid to go cover a team in the city, and they openly complain about it and about how hard it is. And that's bullshit, because yes, it can be taxing emotionally to go down and know that, like, yeah, in my case, right, a few years ago, I was driving an hour and a half after working at Phoenixville for the day, teaching all day, driving an hour and a half, if I was lucky, through traffic to get down to a Flyers game, meet up with you, get everything set up for the press row show, do that while writing something else or grading things and doing all that. Then going down to the basement to do the interviews and the press conference, and then going back up, maybe start writing something that night, and then realizing like I wasn't going to get home until 12:30 or 1 in the morning, and then get up at 5:30 and like try to get our family, together before going off to work again and doing it all again. Like, some people I don't think have ever had to like really work in a certain capacity. And they take it for granted. And if they were some of the people who, listen to this show or who care about these teams that like are actually doing physically taxing work or actual emotionally taxing work, helping people in need, doing stuff like Bundy does with the recovery community, working in medicine, working in law, like all those things. Like, I don't think they would complain about it the way that they do. So all this is to say, there is this new feeling, this renewed optimism, and I think it's not just the team and it's not just lip service. It does feel like there's an optimism around the entire organization. And the fact that you can have that while also acknowledging, like she did there and like Jonesy did earlier in the show in that interview, this is not a team right now or an organization that's trying to sell people a fake story or try to sell them that this is going to be a good team next year. Somehow you can have optimism and be excited about the future because you know that the people who are now in charge of it are in lockstep on what they think needs to happen. And that ultimately is probably to tear down a lot of it and rebuild it so that it's not just a 1 or 2 year Band-Aid bubble team, but it's a team that can have sustained success for an extended period of time. So I'll throw it back to you, Ant, where you're at, where we are, where this whole thing is right now. Do you think people should feel excited about where the Flyers are? Maybe not on the ice in this upcoming season, but like these next few years. Should they feel comfortable to let themselves get hurt again? I guess is what I'm asking.
Be vulnerable. You want them to, is it okay to be vulnerable about hockey again? And I say yes. I say yes. And that was the whole point of my story the other day, right? It was that, look, we don't know ultimately if Keith Jones and Danny Briere are going to be a success.
Yep.
We could sit here and project out all we want. We can look at the things that concern us. We can look at the things that we are confident in. I got a DM, and I told this guy I would mention it during the live show tonight. Kel DM'd me, and one of the things he was concerned about, he was like, it's hard to believe what the Flyers are selling. And he gave a couple of things that he wasn't sure about. Say, well, when they're telling us Keith Jones has a great understanding of what the game needs, but he's on the air hyping and supporting players who analytically, I think he means analytically minded, have proven to have negative value, such as Brandon Lemieux, Nick Delorier, and Rasmus Ristolainen. So if he has such a good grasp of the game, why does he constantly only talk up bad players? He's not constantly talking up bad players. I mean, you can't say constantly. He's had the job 4 days. But the point is that there is value for those players in your lineup. Not at the top of your lineup, but in the bottom of your lineup. I mean, in the locker room, Nick Delorier was there at the presser. So was Sean Couturier, right? And who else was there? It was three. Oh, and Rasmus Ristolainen. They were the three guys that were there. And that's so like they're right in of itself. It's like it's not, he knows the sport and he knows the value of a player like that. That's not going to sit here and say, oh, he's going to be the best, damn the analytics, he's going to be fine. It's not that at all. It's that there is value to having a player like that on your roster. You got to remember there's a $80 million salary cap. You're not going to be able to load up on 12 fast little forwards. It's just not going to happen. And, and 6 puck moving defensemen. It's not going to happen. So every team has these players. It's identifying the ones that fit into what you're trying to sell. And in John Tortorella, it's his standard. And then the other thing he mentioned, and this is, I think we'll go back to something that you wanted to talk about because you told me to remind you off of that Facebook comment. He says, when you talk about, it looks like when you look at Dan Hilferty, he said it's concerning because he was hyped up to be, quote, a tenacious Flyers fan, but during the formal introduction stated that he knew nothing about hockey. And what I think I want to say, and then I'll let you finish it up because he talked about it, it was the answer that he gave you, is you can be a tenacious fan and know nothing about hockey. Mm-hmm. It's okay. It's all right. We all, as fans of sports, think they know everything, and they really, most of the time they don't, and that's okay. I'm one of them in certain sports. Like, I'm a fan of certain sports. I'm a fan of certain teams. I don't know everything about the sport. I may fancy myself as knowing, but I don't. But that's part of being a fan. It's fan is short for fanatical, and fanatical means that you're not necessarily of the right mind, right? When you're fanatical. So that's a thing. So it's okay to be that. And he understands what his role is. He understands where he has to look. If it's something he doesn't know about, he's not going to try and intervene. He's not going to try and let somebody else whisper in his ear, no, don't do that. Do it this way. Like, you're not, this isn't a Nelson Rockefeller kind of situation going on here. Like, this is a legitimate business leader who knows what his role is. Yeah. So it's okay to not know. That's all. So that's what I think, and I think that's what Torts was trying to say when he answered my question, when he was starting to freak out about the whole, what does it matter?
What does it matter? What does it matter?
Why do they play for the Flyers? They're diseased.
Yeah,
right. I mean, that's what he was saying, but that's what he was trying to convey in his response, is that not everybody knows everything, but they know if they are able to do the things that they're good at, and other people can pick up the slack and do the things that they're good at, then that's what makes a team. Everybody pulling on the same rope. So now I want to throw it back to you.
So I want to go back to this one from Colin Craddock about the transparency being refreshing, and we finally seem to have somebody who can talk to the fans. So I sat there and I waited and I plotted and I waited until almost the end of the press conference. And the thing that I threw to Dan Hilferty that he answered in the presser, and then I followed up with him after the fact, was you were going about this in a way that you had your coach established, you had your GM established, and you go into a presidential search. And did the fact that knowing that Briere and Tortorella were in lockstep, did that allow you to consider other intangibles? And the one that I brought up to him on the side was the affect of the candidates, their personability, how they would mesh with the GM and with the head coach. Did that play a factor? And the part that I asked him in the press conference was, was knowing that Jonesy has the kind of gravitas that he has with the fans, where he can do morning radio, or that he can do color commentary, he can do the analyst role. Does having somebody who can be forward facing, does that play a role in deciding who gets this job? And he said, yeah. And the thing about affect, he was like, absolutely. Because you don't have to focus as much on some of the things that you might in a traditional search for president of hockey ops, because you know that your coach and your GM are in agreement. And so part of it is a personality fit. Part of it is making sure that you do bring somebody in who's going to work well as a triumvirate, as a trio, right? There were people, and I think we talked about this on the last episode, and if we didn't, we'll probably talk about it next time or something. But there were a few people who interviewed for this job who, by all accounts, wanted final say and who wanted to have perhaps more control as the president of hockey ops, have every move and every decision kind of run by them, by the GM or by the coach. And what this organization seemed to have leaned into more is, no, we're going to delegate the responsibility of building the roster to Danny. We're going to give the coaching to Torts, and the president's going to kind of oversee it all. But like even Keith Jones mentioned in the press conference, like he's going to offer his input to Briere, but like Briere is going to be one building the roster. So if your goal was to go and get somebody who can be forward facing and who can also kind of, bridge the gap if Briere and Tortorella aren't seeing eye to eye, and also get somebody who has enough of a backbone to not get railroaded by Tortorella or by Tortorella and Briere or whatever, Jones can be that guy. And so, I put this out on Twitter last weekend. There's a dad at the soccer game, the U8 soccer game, right? We're sitting there and he's like, I want to hear all about Jonesy. I want to know if it's a good hire. And this guy thought of Jonesy as the fart noise guy on WIP. And he's like, why did they hand the team over to him? And I said, because it fit what they were looking for. And I think you and I could probably agree on this. We don't know if it's going to work. No idea. We'd like to think that the organization made a good hire. We have no idea if it's going to work. But for what they were looking for, which in some part was to have somebody who can be a forward-facing PR kind of, engage with the fans, he's a good hire. And he's well-liked. He's well-respected. And as we mentioned in that interview, he's somebody who GMs and presidents of teams have been very open and transparent about. He probably has some decent intel on which guys could be good change of scenery players. He's got, if that gives you a 12 to 18 month lead on the rest of the league, knowing who some of those players are, it's probably not a bad thing for this team. But we'll see. We'll see if it was a good decision or not. And as Hilferty said in the press conference, you asked him, are you worried that this is bucking the trend? Or is this something where you want to set the new trend? And he said, well, I hope nobody sets it, because if it works, we want to have that advantage,
right? And then he asked me to write the book if it works.
That's
I know we want to kind of wrap this up.
It's a long episode.
Yeah, it is. And there's two things I want to do. One last thing I want to address, two comments that came in recently, and then we have a bunch of 5-star reviews, Russ, that we got to get to.
Oh, geez.
A bunch. Okay. I think we have 6. So anyway, the two I want to mention, and I used to be able to have control of this thing and I could pop it up, but now you've made it so that you are, unilaterally in charge over there, Ron Hextall. So that you're the Ron Hextall.
Don't need any
of
chicken
Snow the
wings.
Goalie podcast. But I wanted to mention King Kenzo put something up, right?
I have it. Yep.
Got it. You got it. So he said, when the Penguins hire Eric Tulsky, I'm jumping ship.
Big analytics. Big analytics.
For those of you who don't know who Eric Tulsky is, he's the assistant general manager of the Carolina Hurricanes, and he is this holy grail to a certain segment of the Flyers fan base, because Eric Tulsky used to be a contributor back in the day at the beginning of Broad Street Hockey. And so he was a fan who was writing about the Flyers, and he was at the forefront kind of that analytics movement in hockey. And so he used to write his articles in an analytic style. I know Eric. He's a bright guy. He's a very good assistant general manager, but he has no experience as a GM. And he, would he be a better GM than Danny Briere? Maybe, maybe not. We don't know. But I think that's that white whale kind of thing for some Flyers fans, because they just want it to be him because he used to be one of them, and not necessarily because, he would be the best person for the job. So I just want to put that out there as to, why people may see that name a lot or hear that name a lot. And I root for Eric Tulsky. Like I said, I know him. I'm friendly with him. I hope he does get a chance to be a GM somewhere, and I hope that he's greatly successful at doing it. It's a great story to go from being a fan who was writing a blog about his favorite hockey team to then make it into management, right? I mean, that's a really cool story, but I don't necessarily think that it's an automatic that he's going to be fantastic. I mean, he would have just as much of a learning curve as anyone else who was a first-time general manager. Okay, that one I want to say. And the only other one I wanted to point out came out right after that. John Irizarry, who has made a lot of comments, and you put up one of his earlier. But I wanted to put that last one up because you see it, the 933 one, if you want to put it up at 933. Yeah, that one. Honestly, I was not happy about the Jonesy hire until I watched your YouTube show, and Anthony made me relook at things and be open-minded. I will be skeptical like a lot of fans. I will be skeptical like a lot of fans now, but I believe things will be okay.
We've converted people. See
Russ, if I was only one person that I converted with this tonight, then I did my job. So John, thank you for being my test, my one person, my one.
You see that Anthony's a shill. Anthony's the shill, not me. Right?
All right, go ahead. Get to the 5 stars so we can get out
but KW1323 says everyone loves Jonesy and Danny, but I'm still in show me mode, rooting for them. But I believe it's going to get turned around when I start to see it, which is fair. Like I think that's just part of that skepticism, and that's fair. And by the way, a lot of people are hurt right now. It's the Flyers fans that are hurt. It's the Sixers fans that are hurt. They're about to become the Philadelphia Rockets again. That's going to be great. Yeah. So we'll go from there. You mentioned that there are some 5-star reviews. We'll go to those really quickly. I have no idea what there were those weird we got those emails a while back. I'm just looking to see greatapp.com. All right, the best Flyers podcast hands down. By the way, if you're listening or if you're watching, well, right now you're watching, but if you're listening to the podcast feed after the fact, you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, don't forget you can subscribe to the podcast, which is always helpful. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts. We're also on Amazon Music and Pandora, wherever you get your podcasts. Leave a 5-star review. 5-star ratings are great. We love them on Spotify. You go to the show page, you hit the 5 stars. And if you're on Apple Podcasts, you go over there and you leave 5-star rating is great, but the reviews are what we read. We read them even if you're critical of us, as long as it's 5 stars. Greatapp.com, the best Flyers podcast, hands down. This is the perfect podcast for any true Flyers fan. Ant, Russ, and Bundy's personalities complement each other well, and these guys understand the pulse of the fan base. Russ brings energy. Oh, great energy.
Great energy.
And guys, great energy. Fantastic energy. And guides the show in great directions. Anthony is as plugged into the organization as anybody, and Bundy understands what it means to be a Flyer fan, and a hockey fan. Bundy was a great addition because he truly gets it. With what has been lacking with the team, I look forward to each new episode. It's my go-to listening on a Friday after new episodes come out. RJ Hockey 21. Thank you. A knowledgeable Flyers pod. Finally, people that say it how it is about the Flyers, that Bundy and Russ rants is mainly why I listen. Also, I firmly believe that any Flyers fan could do a better job than Fletcher as GM and president of Hockey Ops. Here we are a few weeks later.
Wait. RJ Hockey 21. Is RJ stand for Russ Joy?
It does not.
Because that sounds like something you would write about yourself.
No, because there's some spelling stuff. I wouldn't have allowed that to happen. You know how I am. Coco the Bear, 5-star, an honest review of an honest podcast. Finally, a Flyers podcast that isn't fueled by the misleading Flyers PR machine and made by guys who aren't afraid to give hot takes. As a Hershey native and someone who bleeds orange and black, shout out former Hershey Bear Bundy. It's great to find a podcast that holds the Flyers accountable. Only a few episodes into this podcast, and it's already given myself great insight to behind the deals and moves already being made in such a difficult time in Flyers history. You can tell this podcast is fueled by Wawa coffees, tasty cakes, and cheesesteaks, and how passionate they are when talking about the Flyers. Keep up the great work, fellas. I would love to have a coffee, a cheesesteak, and a tasty cake right now.
Can I just say one thing about Wawa coffee?
Yeah.
So Mother's Day, I ran out to go get Maria coffee in the morning, 8:30 in the morning, went to our Wawa. Now,
this can be a Wawa hot take.
No, it's not at all. There's a Dunkin' Donuts maybe 100 yards from the Wawa. The Dunkin' Donuts is getting remodeled, so it was closed Mother's Day morning. I walked into the Wawa.
We just lost 10 people, by the way.
8:30 in the morning, I walked into the Wawa, and they were out of coffee because they were ill prepared for the crush of people who usually go to Dunkin' Donuts to get the coffee to go show up at Wawa. They were out of coffee on Mother's Day morning. That's got to be like the worst mistake in the history of convenience stores. Anyway,
I have another opinion. But I'm not going to.
I know yours is that Sheets would never be out of coffee. Go ahead.
Continue. I honestly, I would implore you to try Sheets coffee at some point. They actually have the beans up top. They
I've had
grind
it.
it as it's
It's
going.
not, it's good.
Sheets coffee actually is pretty
I've
good.
had
I
it.
was surprised.
I'm not a big Sheets fan, but their coffee's not bad.
Just gonna say, Penny Aloha People says condolences and kudos. Hey guys, long-time listener, first-time reviewer. Always great stuff. I am a funeral director and own my own funeral home in Lehigh Valley. So naturally, the Flyers are my favorite team since my hopes and dreams die each season. Love the chemistry each of you bring. Unlike my profession, you guys always brighten up a dark time with your knowledge, humor, and love of the city and its fans. Here's hoping to the resurrection of this franchise. Let's go Flyers. Morty McMortery.
I'm not sure.
I was making sure it wasn't mortuary. It wasn't mortuary.
Yeah, but I still think it's a play on that word, but that's okay.
Well, maybe it is. Okay. And then we have Hickey79. Fantastic show, boys. But question. Great show. Love the content. And I'm here waiting for the next episode to drop for more info. That's how much I need the therapy. We all know hiring a coach, then a GM, then a president of hockey is back asswards. But I am hopeful for success. I like Jonesy. I wanted Danny as GM. I've always loved Torts. However, if one of the three doesn't fit, who is it? I know my answer. P.S. I finally listened to Russ and subbed to the new YouTube channel.
Well, thanks for Hickey. Good work by you on subscribing to the YouTube channel. And if I want to answer that question, I say if the one doesn't fit, it's the coach. But it's only because I had to pick one.
If the coach don't fit, you must have quit.
Only because I had to pick one. I do think that the three fit together and they're of the same mindset. I know someone had mentioned earlier that Tortorella burns out his welcome everywhere he's been. That's not true. It's only in Vancouver was he in and out in 1 year. Tampa, New York, and Columbus. He had extended stays, 5-6 years. That's long for an NHL coach. Believe me.
Believe me. And final one, Mr. Abe Froman, the best hockey podcast. Period. Flyers fans. 3 exclamation points. I love the enthusiasm. I've listened to several hockey podcasts with the focus on the Flyers, and this is the best one. Russ, Anthony, and Bundy are absolutely great, entertaining, and honest. They give good insight and have good information about possible moves from the team. They speak in reality in regards to the team, and it's not always positive in regards to players or the front office. I saw a great tweet from Russ Choi on Twitter some weeks back, and he gained a Twitter follower and a subscriber to the pod. I can't seem to find his wrestling pod, but I would love to give that a try as well. Keep up the great work, boys. Let's go Flyers. I don't know who this is. No, this is not me. Hold on. I read this. I did not. I read this, and because if it had been me, I would have noted that show, of course, is It's Just Wrestling, which is your new 10th favorite pro wrestling podcast. You can find that everywhere you get your podcasts. And on YouTube, it's like it's got like a teal and a pink logo. It's Just Wrestling. I'm going to do a new episode, maybe tomorrow after AEW Dynamite. But I would have plugged that. I would have shamelessly plugged that in a review. I don't know who did it, but I love it. And I appreciate the fact that they're here. So Mr. Abe Froman, here's to you. You get the fan of the week or something. We don't do that, but here we are. By the way, before we head out of here, we had a bunch of people. CMZ, this Alexis Gendron kid we picked in the 7th round looks like a steal. This was the kid that got brought up on the last live stream, I think, about Gendron. Mm-hmm. We'll talk about him at some point. I want to get somebody in who's actively watching and following those games. I'm not going to fake it. I have not watched Gendron play at all. But if he's good, we'll take it. Remember, because there was somebody in the last stream who said that Gendron could end up being better than Bedard, and then we all died.
No.
And then we all died.
Let's not go too far with that. I mean, he's probably better than where he was drafted, but let's pump the brakes a little bit, okay?
John checks in on YouTube and says, Sheets has tater tots, but I love my Wawa. Listen, there's nothing quite like when you're going on a road trip and you stop at Sheets and you get the Schmonster burrito, get the breakfast burrito with the tots inside. Perfection. C-Mac says it's $3.58 for an extra large at Dunkin' now. So thank you to C-Mac for keeping us apprised of the price of Dunkin'. Scott says on YouTube that Wawa coffee is the OG colon cleanser. Dunkin' Donuts for me. Okay, I think we're in good shape. We've now had a colon cleanse reference. I think it's time to go. So listen, a big thank you to everybody who checked out the show.
Yes. Thanks for coming in.
We had a lot of people between YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter checking in on the show. Do us a favor. If you're watching right now, I want you to, when this is all done, you can do it now or you can do it after. Share this episode So if you're on Facebook, share the link to other people who are on Facebook who you know are like Facebook people who like to watch on Facebook. If you are a YouTube viewer, please, for God's sake, I've only said it a million times, subscribe to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/@snowthegoalie. Share the link. Share the link to this live broadcast. It'll also repopulate and everything, and it'll show up on the channel. But, subscribe to the YouTube channel. And then, of course, you can find this show wherever you get your podcasts: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, Pandora, the works. So make sure you follow the show, you subscribe, and we will talk to you all very soon. Anthony, I'm excited. I'm sure you are as well. A new era of Orange. Have a great night, everyone. And for Anthony, who you can find on Twitter @AntSanPhilly, I'm Russ @JoyOnBroad. Follow the show, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, @SnowTheGoalie, youtube.com/@SnowTheGoalie. We'll be back next week with a new episode. We will. Next week. Until then, have a great day, everybody.